Between Sweden and Finland, there's a set of islands that caused great tension between these two countries 100 years ago. These days it's mostly famous for its lovely nature and for very expensive champagne. Today I'm visiting the Åland Islands. I mentioned the Åland Islands in a recent video I posted about the white trash cruise between Sweden and Finland. I often tend to say stupid things, but in that video I said something extra stupid. I said that Åland is an independent country. As many people kindly pointed out, that's absolutely not true. Åland is not an independent country, it's a hostage. Åland started to be populated around 4200 BC, and there were many Viking settlements here around the Nordic Iron Age. After that, the islands belonged to Sweden for a long time, for hundreds of years, up until 1809, when Sweden lost Åland as well as Finland to Russia. Russia created the semi-autonomous Grand Duchy of Finland, which included the Åland Islands. Finland got its independence from Russia in 1917, but Åland wanted to reunite with Sweden instead of belonging to Finland. There was a lot of anti-Swedish sentiment in Finland when it became an independent country. Finland was highly nationalistic after being occupied by Russia and belonging to Sweden before that. But the people of Åland didn't really share that sentiment. In 1919, 96.4% of Åland's population wanted to join Sweden instead of remaining with Finland, but Finland refused to let go of these islands. The matter was brought before the League of Nations in 1921, who decided that Finland should retain sovereignty of Åland, but that the islands should become an autonomous territory. With a lot of grumbling from both Sweden and Åland, the treaty was signed. So in the end, against the wishes of the people of Åland, they ended up becoming part of Finland after all. Åland is a pretty strange part of the Nordics. It belongs to Finland, but it's a self-governing territory with its own laws. The people of Åland speak Swedish, and they share a lot of Swedish culture. Finland does have sovereignty over the islands, but the language and the culture are protected by international safeguards. It's also a neutral and demilitarized zone, and since it's one of the few demilitarized zones in the world, it's home to the Åland Peace Institute, a research facility for questions regarding autonomy, security and minorities. Åland has its own parliament and its own government. It all sounds very grandiose, but you have to remember that it's still just a set of small islands between Sweden and Finland. Less than 30,000 people live on Åland, on an area of 1,500 square kilometers. That's almost the same number of people that live in San Marino, but San Marino is just 61 square kilometers. Given that, I was gonna mention that Åland is really sparsely populated, but then I compared it with other Nordic countries, and it's more densely populated than Finland and just below Sweden. The Nordics have a pretty low population density overall. The main city of Åland is Mariehamn, a bustling metropolis of 11,000 people. The city was founded by Russia in 1861, and the name of the city comes from the wife of Tsar Alexander II, Maria Alexandrovna. In the early 1900s, this was a popular spa town, and parts of that still remains in names like the Bathhouse Park and a pub called Bastun, the sauna in Swedish. There's a lot to do on Åland if you enjoy nature. It's a popular place to rent a bicycle or take a boat tour out in the archipelago, and many people go camping as well. You can also do a lot of fishing or play golf or visit curious little fortifications or quaint stores all around the island. Hiking is also quite popular, and it's a good way to enjoy the archipelago. This is Project Emilia, where they're building a two-mast sailing boat from scratch. I think they're still missing some sponsors, so if you feel like pitching in, go for it. Aside from that, you have a couple of museums, like a hunting and fishing museum or the Åland Museum of Cultural History. At this museum you can learn more about the history of Åland and how they lived from the Bronze Age to medieval times and all the way up to modern times. They have found Arabian coins on Åland, so there's been a lot of trade here. You can also learn more about the Russian occupation and the independence that the islands have these days. A few years ago, you could also see something very unexpected at the museum, some very old bottles of champagne. Around the year 1840, a schooner sank near one of the Åland Islands called Föglö. In 2010, this wreck became known as the Champagne Schooner because divers found unopened bottles of champagne and beer still intact inside the wreck. 145 bottles of champagne and 5 bottles of beer were salvaged, and the ship was full of other luxury items and delicacies. The real name of the ship is unknown, but it's speculated that its destination was St. Petersburg to deliver these items to the Russian imperial court. Most of the champagne bottles were auctioned off, and the most expensive one was sold for 30,000 euros. If you fancy some slightly less expensive beverages, you can try the local craft beer from a microbrewery called Stallhagen. The taste of the archipelago. If the archipelago was made of beer. That doesn't really make sense. I should probably cut that away. I wanted to include a section about famous people from Åland, but unfortunately there aren't any. Åland isn't really famous for all that much in general. It has lovely nature though, and the archipelago has been very important for maritime traffic and military. If you're interested in maritime history, there's a Maritime Museum in Mariehamn. Am I allowed to do this? I hope so. Bloody hell, that's loud. At the museum you can see lots of ship models and historical information about maritime traffic on the Åland Islands. You can also find interesting maritime curiosities and exhibits of all kinds. This pirate flag is one of only 2 remaining authentic skull and crossbone flags in the entire world. There's also a sailing ship called Pommern outside the museum. Pullman is a 4-masted steel barque from 1903 that sailed all over the world until she ended up in Mariehamn in 1952. In 1957, she was opened up to the public as a museum, and she's one of the few ships of her kind that's still seaworthy today. Or well, maybe not seaworthy, maybe she can float at best. But that's still pretty good for such an old lady. The combination of the Maritime Museum and the ship Pommern is absolutely amazing. This has got to be one of the best museums I've ever visited. The coat of arms of Åland is a golden red deer on a blue field, and that's a bit weird, because there are no red deer on Åland. In 1560, the similar sounding province of Öland was given this coat of arms by Sweden. And in 1569, Åland was given to the Queen Dowager Katarina Stenbock, but the islands had a different coat of arms back then. Around that time, people got really confused about the similar sounding names Åland and Öland, and the coat of arms got mixed up as well. The coat of arms for Åland and Öland actually ended up completely switching places, and no one noticed the mistake until 1944. By then, Åland had already been passed on to Russia and later Finland, and it retained its erroneous coat of arms that really belonged to Öland. To make things even more confusing, the province of Öland got back its original coat of arms in 1944, but they added a red collar on the deer to make it slightly different from the Åland coat of arms. So these days, Åland and Öland have almost identical coat of arms. Heraldry is a bit of a mess. That's about it for my little visit to the Åland Islands, a strange little autonomous territory of Finland that wanted to belong to Sweden. I hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe, but most importantly, have a great day.